Just going to let people come in at the beginning. Numbers are not moving too fast, so I think everyone is here. So thank you to the technical staff for starting the meeting. So Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Ottawa, Canada. Welcome to this webinar on the economic reactivation of Central American states, COVID-19 pandemic, and the role of Canada. My name is Samy. I'm the director of the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs at Carleton University in Ottawa. Let me first acknowledge that the land on which the Carleton University campus is located and the Ottawa area are on the traditional unceded territories of the Algonquin Nation. Today's event is organized by the embassies of the Central American countries accredited in Canada, namely Costa Rica, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Panama, and Dominican Republic. And we're delighted that you're partnering with Carleton University for this event. Our objective is to explore the impacts of COVID-19 on the economic and commercial prospects of the Central American states and how Canada can support the economic recovery of a region. Before I introduce our speakers for today's event, I will give the floor to the Ambassador of El Salvador, His Excellency Ricardo Cisneros, who will offer some opening remarks. Over to you, Ambassador. You're muted.
It's true. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Teddy. It's a pleasure to have you all here, to see you all here. And on behalf of my colleagues of the Central American countries, the Ambassador of Honduras, Mrs. Sofía Cerrato, Ambassador of Nicaragua, Mauricio Gelli, Ambassador of Costa Rica, Mauricio Ortiz, Ambassador of Panama, Romy Vasquez, represented today by Denise Cabrera, Ambassador of Guatemala, Gisela Godinez, and the Ambassador of Dominican Republic, Michelle Cohen. I am delighted to welcome you all to this webinar organized in the context of the 60th anniversary of the diplomatic relations between Canada and the countries of Central America and Dominican Republic. Special thanks to SIECA, the Secretariat for Central American Economic Integration, and in particular, the Secretary General Francisco Lima, to the BCIE, the Central American Bank for Economic Integration, Dr. Dante Mossi, the Executive President, the Global Affairs Canada Director Sylvia Cesaratto, in particular for her ongoing support to our embassies, to Carleton University, Dr. Teddy Samy, Director of the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs, Dr. Jean Daudelin, Associate Professor, and Karen Schwartz, and all the international team that is supporting this webinar. Finally, thanks to all the participants, and I'm very glad to see you on this webinar. So the pandemic has affected all the world, and we still have challenges to face in health, social, and economic recovery. For 18 months, the priority was first the protection of the populations, and then the immunization of all the citizens. For moments, health was the priority over economy, but now we have the task to recover all our economies and to gradually open the key economic activities and reestablish the flows of trade. But in addition to the pandemic, we also have another challenge, which is also impacting all of us, and it's the global warming and the climate. Today, our populations are aware that the impact of their consumption has on the environment and how tight all our economies are in this interconnected global economy. Companies are looking for more agile production models, and some are transferring their supply chain to regions closer to markets. That's what we call the nearshoring strategies. In this context, what solutions could our governments propose for the future relations between Central American and Dominican Republic and Canada? In our view, these challenges are opportunities for seeing our relations with another perspective. Canada, Central America, and Dominican Republic have much more in common than differences. So let's take this opportunity to explore more cooperative models of development of our societies and economies. And let's see each other as partners, proposing win-win solutions to all the situations we face together. So I look forward to hearing all these perspectives of this panelist. Looking forward to hear about the discussion and hope that this will spark interest in the richness of our region. And if this winter you feel a little bit cold here in Canada, you are very welcome to visit our warm countries and our warm populations. So thank you very much all for being part of this webinar. To you, Teddy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Ambassador Cisneros. So let me now introduce our distinguished speakers for this event. We have our first speaker, Dr. Dante Mossi Reyes, who's the president of the Central American Bank of Economic Integration, or CABE. Dr. Mossi has a PhD in economics from Vanderbilt University, and he specializes in public finance. He will be followed by my colleague, Dr. Jean Daudelin, who's an associate professor at NPSIA. Dr. Daudelin has a PhD in political science from Laval University. He works in the areas of development and conflict, in particular tenure regimes and property rights, with a focus on Latin and Central America. Our third speaker will be the Secretary General of the Secretariat for Central American Economic Integration, SICA, Mr. Francisco Alberto Lima-Mena. Mr. Lima-Mena, lawyer by training with over 25 years expertise in international law, foreign trade, and international development. And our final speaker, but not the least, is Mrs. Sylvia Cesaratto, who's the Director General, Central America and Caribbean from Global Affairs Canada. Mrs. Cesaratto has experience in delivering the Government of Canada's international priorities with a focus on foreign policy, international business, assistance, and security policies. So each of our speakers will speak for 8 minutes, and then we will open the floor for questions and answers. So over to you, Dr. Mossi.
Thank you very much, Teddy, Samy, sorry. Just wanted to CABE, for those who doesn't know it, CABE is a national development bank created 6 years ago by the Central American countries, the 5 founding members, Guatemala, Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Rica. And throughout this 60-year history, the bank has grown and it's added new country members, such as Mexico, Colombia, the Dominican Republic, Argentina, Cuba. We also have Spain, the Republic of China, Taiwan, the Republic of South Korea, and I think that's it. It's 15 countries. And we are rated as AA, the highest rated institution in Latin America. There's no one, not even Chile. So with that said, without those presentation cards, I would say this is a success of the economic integration of Central America. Back in March, we were invited by Central America to an emergency meeting in which we were briefed by the actions of the Central American countries, saying that they were about to close all traffic of passengers, and that they were not going to close commercial traffic within the region, though. And they asked the CABE to agree to assist financially the countries. The first reaction we had was to prepare a comprehensive package of about $2.4 billion, which we later increased to about $5 billion, and to support government's emergency response, and also to facilitate test kits for COVID. And we use our new found member, Korea, to get access to kits for testing COVID. This is the only case in which a bank has purchased medical equipment for the member countries. But the fantastic achievement of this action, the regional bank, was that we provided 28,000 test kits for each country, from Belize all the way to Panama, at about $10, at the time in which countries were paying up to $70 for these test kits. We also provided finance for financing the vaccines. As we said from the onset, the only way to end the pandemic in the region is going to be with access to vaccines. We actually voiced our concerns to the major shareholders of CABE that Central America did not have access to vaccines. The COVAX mechanism didn't have enough. We actually provided a thematic bond for vaccines, raise capital in Asia to about rates for a AAA bank. Global solidarity with CABE was fantastic. And we actually chatted with several pharmaceutical companies to ensure that the countries have access to financing. And with that said, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, all of them use these credit lines to buy vaccines with the financial backing of CABE, and they actually got access to vaccines in a more timely manner than the rest of the countries. There was some vaccine diplomacy in the region, mainly with China and Russia, which they definitely help a lot. But again, what was very clear is that all friends do matter. And in this case, the United States of America, Spain, Mexico, and the Dominican Republic at some moment in time provided vaccines to the, these countries with high infection rates and high death rates. The economy tanked in average about 10%. The economies that were stronger with services like Panama, the Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, had a huge hit. The rest of the economies, really Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, since they were not affected as much from the tourism sector, the real economy actually had to go in a standstill. But when conditions allowed it and the markets reopened, it was easier for them to get back to a better path. But then hurricanes, one after the other, just 2 weeks in between them, Category 5 hurricanes, Eta and Iota, caused terrible damage to particularly Nicaragua, Honduras, and Guatemala. So with that said, what I wanted to tell you is that the countries were particularly resilient to all these hits. COVID-19 was really a crisis about jobs lost. We created a program to help the private sector, particularly the small and medium enterprise, to help finance the back to health of these small businesses. And we found a lot of help from our historical partners. And I mentioned Spain, the European Union, Germany, France, Taiwan, and even the US. The first time ever they provided a loan to CABE directly. So we were able to provide even UN Women, I should add, because our small and medium enterprise financing program was actually very effective, as we use the network of banks in Central America to reach out to the small and medium enterprises. So with that said, and we had a guarantee fund. Provided public funding for government agencies to provide for subsidies to people who were, asked to remain at home and without savings. So these individuals needed a rescue package, humanitarian package, to have food delivered to their home during the harshest days, the quarantines, mandated quarantines. So what we'll see now is that thanks to vaccination rates being very high, countries are coming back online. I'm currently in the Dominican Republic, and I can tell you, this is one of the countries that saw the fastest recovery. That's why I'm wearing this shirt. I'm not wearing a suit and tie because the Dominican Republic can have a guayabera, which is kind of the official, dress code here. And but with that said, what we found is that governments now have a lot of public debt, and so we need to support the private sector to continue with the efforts in infrastructure, which is the main driver of CAVE, is that we are using private-public partnership arrangements to go forward with the major big projects. And we are working very successfully with all the countries, with all of them. CAVE actually has reached out to Canada in the past, so I'm so glad that we're actually having this conversation. I think Canada should be a member of CAVE. We still have a $100 million in shares available for an additional partner of quality, and we'll be delighted to have Canada. Canada is already an observer of the SICA system, so they can easily just spend $25 million and become a shareholder of CAVE, and I think it makes sense. We are actually looking for this final partner of our last capitalization effort. We increased capital from $5 billion to $7 billion, and so that these are the $100 million remaining. Our board requested study the capital increase to $10 billion later on, but for now, this is the only capital available we have. My request, ambassadors, and I'm so glad all the ambassadors of my member countries here. I think it's going to make a lot of sense to have Canada, joining CAVE or working together, even if for some political reason, like in the US, that they have a policy of not providing capital to regional banks, sub-regional banks, as they call it. I think it makes sense. CAVE provides for more than half of the financing to every Central American country. The World Bank and the IDB are not relevant as we are in terms of providing financing. And I say this with humility, but the bank has grown, and we have gained this good access to financing. So back to the COVID-19. We need to do things differently. We need to work in an agenda to include a maquila for vaccines now, and we're working with Korea on that project. But also we are working with newer projects, electric mobility, from cars to trains, hospitals, ports, airports, a green battery, as we call it, a hydroelectric with solar energy. In El Salvador, we're talking about geothermal energy. So in general, let me stop. I know I went above my 8 minutes. We see a region that is growing. It's not requesting to have grants. We are looking to have partners in our way forward in this economy in which we share values, respect to the environment, respect to women, respect to how we actually are poor. So with that said, thank you very much, and I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mossi, and thanks for providing us with an overview of the work that the bank does, and also for highlighting some of the recent developments happening. I noted in particular your comment about rising levels of debt and the need for the private sector to be more involved in infrastructure, especially. So I'm sure there will be interest in getting, in coming back to this towards the end for the questions. So I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Jean Daudelin, who will speak about the opportunities and challenges for Canada-Central American relations economic relations. Over to you, Jean.
Good afternoon, señores, señores. It's truly a pleasure, a privilege to join such a distinguished panel. I will discuss a few of the challenges that confront the region, perhaps from the standpoint of longer term and more substantive, the establishment of longer term and more substantive relationship between Canada and Central America, which is really what Dr. Mossi was referring to. So first of all, there's little doubt that Central America is going through a terrible period of its recent history, and that it deserves and could benefit from increased international support. The region, however, should not be seen as an aid file, which it has long been confined to, okay? With a young population, stable economies, overall, I mean, that crisis aside, among other things, excellent economic potential as a tourist destination, but in many other areas also, but also with reasonable growth before the pandemic, an overall GDP of more than $200 billion and a population of 50 million people. I mean, Central America is larger, significantly larger than Canada. Central America could be a valuable economic partner. There's no doubt about that, especially for a country so desperate for long-term strategic diversification of its trade dependence, given the attitude of the United States with China. In recent years, however, let's say 10, 15, 20 years, extreme levels of criminal violence in several countries of the region have discouraged many outsiders, even those like Canada who had seriously engaged the region in the past. For instance, through free trade arrangements. I mean, Canada was really interested in giving substance to its declarations, to its interest for the region. Now that situation appears to be changing. Costa Rica and Nicaragua have mostly escaped the violence epidemic that has plagued the neighbors to the north, the famous, sadly famous, Northern Triangle of Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. But the good news is that the latter country seems to be turning things around. Honduras still has a terrifying homicide rate of more than 60 per 100 inhabitants. Canada's hovers around 2, but it was almost 25% higher 10 years ago. Guatemala's homicide rate has declined by half over the same period. And El Salvador, long a global, unfortunately, and very sadly, long a global champion in this sad league, homicide rates have declined by 85% since 2015. So there's really a very encouraging change taking place. Unfortunately, however, these developments, these very welcome developments, have come in the context of significant decline in the quality of governance, democracy, and the rule of law in several countries of the region, primarily Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. The recent elections of Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua following the arrest and exile of most opposition leaders were, and I'm sorry to say that, but were a farce. In El Salvador, the firing of the Attorney General, the changes in the Supreme Court represent, and other around the consolidation of power by the current president represent serious challenges to democratic guarantees. In Honduras, multiple corruption accusations against President Juan Orlando Hernandez and members of his party, the condemnation for drug trafficking of his brother, along with the violence that has plagued the primaries that are forthcoming in the coming days, all point to the extreme fragility of Honduras' democratic institutions. Guatemala finally does not, unfortunately, much better. Former President Jimmy Morales' expulsion of the UN and Canada-supported International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala already occurred badly. Those ominous signs, however, were confirmed as the new government summarily fired the prosecutor investigating corruption accusation against President Dante, and the latter engaged in aggressive repression of peaceful demonstrations, increasingly in the use of local state of emergency to deal with popular discontent. No wonder a chorus of respectable international organizations and think tanks, from Human Rights Watch to Ideas to Transparency International, have all expressed extreme preoccupations about democracy, respect for human rights, and the rule of law in the region. In the long term, that is, aside from the emergency and humanitarian aid that is clearly needed in this moment of crisis, it may be difficult for a country like Canada to engage unconditionally with the governments of countries where corruption is rife and where democratic guarantees and the rule of law are under threat. The private sector, if it sometimes cares little or seems to care little democracy, legal security, weak justice systems may not be able to give them. Serious engagement, in other words, calls for a generous outlook on the part of Canada, an open mind, but it also calls for efforts on the part of Central American governments to bolster democratic and the rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you very much, for these comments. You've obviously pointed a number of challenges in the box, and you've also indicated some interesting trends that tend to be a bit more positive. So again, as our previous speaker, I'm sure that there will be interesting questions coming out of your presentation. So thank you. So now I'm going to turn it over to the Secretary of SICA, Mr. Francisco Alberto Lima-Mena, who will now speak about imagining a new economy in a post-COVID world, Central America and Canada. Over to you, Mr. Mena.
So thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you. A special hi to my friend Ricardo, the ambassador of El Salvador, who very kindly invited me and made all the efforts to assure that I participated in this very interesting panel this afternoon. So just a clarification. I'm the Secretary General of SIECA, which is quite different from SICA. So SICA basically is the institution that governs as a whole the integration system, and SIECA, which is the agency that I lead, is the agency dealing with the economic aspects of the Central American integration process. So basically, as I tell, this secretariat is in charge of, I would say, of the end goal is establishing a customs union, which was the goal established back 60 years ago. Back in October this year, SIECA, as the oldest institution in the Central American integration process, had its 60th birthday. So that's kind of very significant if one relates that to how Central America sees the integration process. A lot of efforts are put in the economic aspects of the system. As probably some of you are aware, I did take duties as of July this year. Basically, the reason that I say this is basically my vision of the conduction of SIECA for the next 4 years, and that goes on with the post-COVID recovery process. And even talking about post-COVID nowadays seems to be still something, a wishful thinking. I think we're in the COVID era still. So the question is, when will we be in the post-COVID? So as probably you would know, some of the impacts that we had back in the 2020 is the decrease in overall of exports of the region back to a negative 5% compared to the 2019 period. And an interesting fact and figure is that the intra-regional trade decreased by almost 27%. And I would say that the main reason of this sharp decrease within intra-Central American trade happened because of the reactions the countries had back in March 2020, when countries decided to close, basically, close their countries, both to the import of goods, services, goods and persons, people. So as you probably might imagine, this had a huge impact in terms of services. Basically, tourism is a high commodity in the region. So a 27% decrease is quite significant if one comes to analyze this situation. So this made the presidents and the ministers in charge of economic integration aware of the situation, to take very forceful steps in overcoming this closure of countries. And in record time, within 2 months, the different protocols and measures to regulate trade within a COVID environment were adopted both by the Council of Ministers of Trade and the Ministers of Health. So that made it possible for the countries to regulate, or the relations became normal again, and we had the flow of goods and people within the region. So this was a very significant step towards that direction. At the same time, I would say that this is a very interesting fact, that the second most important trade partner of Central America is Central America in itself. So that's a very interesting figure. And if one compares this to the sharp decrease of 27% back in 2020, you can, figure out how this impacted the region. The exports to Canada were affected by almost 15.8% if one compares the 2020 period with the 2019 period. So this was kind of a very sharp decrease. And this was influenced both in the goods sector and in the service sector, meaning services, the tourism sector. So this is kind of, say, important background information. Now, how do we see Central America in I would say, a COVID environment and post-COVID? And I would say that digitalization agenda in the region is very important in my view. And we're giving very forceful steps in this direction to include in the agenda of the works done by the Secretariat to present to ministers the digitalization agenda. Basically, we have established a platform of digital trade within the region, which will operate as a single window for all 6 countries, and it would encompass around 71 services. This platform has been provided, and we have developed this platform for the past, I would say, the working of this has taken almost, I would say, 5 years on the works, and it's going to be launched in the first semester of 2022. And this would be, I would say, a big boost for the flow of goods and services within the region. 71 services that include the ministers of agriculture, the customs, the single windows, and the immigration authorities. So within these 4 offices, we have put together 71, I would say, services for the trade within the region. And this is quite important within the region that this platform would be working with. Imagining Central America too, for the post-COVID, I would say it is the fully incorporation of Panama to the subsystem is quite important. Back in 2013, Panama decided to become a member of the Central American economic integration process, and the work of it is still ongoing. So advancing the work of Panama to the Central American integration process is quite an important element. And I would say that the presentation card of Central America with a full membership of Panama is quite important if one considers the service sector and the canal, the interchange of goods that includes the canal operation. Advancing to the customs union is also, I would say, a long-term debt still. 60 years after this process was launched, this was the ultimate goal, and still we're working on it. So advancing to the full customs union is quite a priority in this agenda, and I would not imagine a post-COVID recovery process without this being included. This takes me to an element which is the ongoing process right now of a deep integration of Guatemala and Honduras, and El Salvador recently incorporated. And these are, I would say, very determined steps of these three countries in order to advance basically on the trade facilitation agenda of the whole of the Central American countries. So basically, these three now with El Salvador included in the northern part of Central America are working, I would say, in advancing a customs union, an element of the customs union, I would say, in a much more speedy way. And the measures that have been taken are focused basically on the trade facilitation issues. We have three, I would say, custom posts, integrated custom posts right now in the area between Guatemala and Honduras. So that's kind of a process that's fully being implemented right now. So the deep integration process, I see it as a component of the ultimate goal of a customs union. Unfortunately, I would say, it has sometimes been said that what's going on between Guatemala and Honduras is a customs union. But as we know, this is impossible. You cannot have a customs union within the customs union. So basically this process, ongoing process between Guatemala and Honduras, and now with El Salvador, is a component of the ultimate goal, which is a customs union. Certainly, I would highly encourage, and this is something important, to make the free trade agreement between Canada and some of the Central American countries work on both ways. Unfortunately, not all members of Central America are still part of this free trade agreement, notwithstanding different calls of governments like El Salvador to conclude this process. And I would say that integrating this is quite an interesting thing if one comes to see the determined steps that Central America is taking as a whole in the process of the customs union. So I would say these are some of the elements I can envisage in a COVID or post-COVID environment for Central America. This is kind of in a nutshell. Certainly we could talk about this for hours, but I would be more than happy to answer some of the questions that probably my intervention might have arisen. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alberto Lima-Mena, and thanks also for pointing out the exact right pronunciation of the organization, which is SIECA. That was my mistake, as I did not read it properly. I also want to take this opportunity to encourage our attendees to post questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of their screens. So I will now pass the floor to Mrs. Cesaratto, who is from Global Affairs Canada and who will be speaking on Canada's Central America relations, economic performance, and priorities. Before we do that, I just wanted to note, and I think there will be also questions about what was presented by our previous speaker, in particular, this emphasis on digitalization, which I think is really crucial at this point in time, and also the emphasis on continuing the integration process in the region, as well as figuring out how to trade better with the rest of the world. I think the numbers both the intra-trade aspect and trade with the rest of the world tells us that there needs to be efforts on both sides of that equation. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Mrs. Cesaratto for her remarks. Over to you.
Good afternoon, Professor, and thank you for the warm welcome. I wonder if you can bear with me for a moment because I need to share my screen.
Okay.
And you know, technology always gets the better of me. So please do let me know if you can see this. In fact, I probably should put it in slideshow mode.
Yeah, we can see it now.
And if you see that, that means I don't see my notes. But I'll go from memory. So, pardon me?
No, we can see your screen and your notes.
Oh, you can see my notes, so that's not very good. Okay. I wonder, Alex, if you can share it and I'll just work from this one.
Yeah, I'll take over from here.
Thank you. Apologies for that. I knew that would happen. So firstly, let me just say thank you for the warm welcome and congratulations to the team that has put this together, in particular the ambassadors of the region. It's really such a pleasure to be with you here today, in particular during this celebration of the 60th anniversary bilateral. So pleased that you thought of inviting me in my capacity to represent the government of Canada. Also want to salute some of participants on this panel that I've had the pleasure of working with before, including Professor Samy and of course Dr. Mossi. Been very nice to connect with you again here today. So perhaps for the next slide and for the participants that are on the line, I wanted to give you a sense of why the Government of Canada is involved in this space and what our role is. For the students here and others, you may know that the of Global Affairs does support the Government of Canada in their interest in supporting Canadian industry and expanding their business outside of Canada and expanding their footprint. You'll know that we're a department that has three ministers: Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mélanie Joly, Minister of International Development, Harjit Sajjan, and Minister of, and I'll read this because it's a long title, International Trade, Export Promotion, Small Business and Economic Development, Minister Mary Ng. So she has a very big portfolio, and she's the only one of the three ministers that came back to her previous portfolio after the elections. And so the department, and in fact, the Department of Industry, Science and Economic Development, support her in delivering on her mandate, which is to implement a trade diversification strategy. That's both in terms of the profile of the exporters, but also in developing new markets and in promoting a rules-based international trade order. Across all of that, we apply the lens of an inclusive trade approach. And all of these, I'm mentioning all of these now because they play out well in terms of our priorities in Central America. And what I will try to do here is kind of expand a bit on what the Government of Canada's priorities are, but most it's important to keep in mind that all of our programming and our support is aligned, be it foreign policy, be it international trade, be it international development. And the lens that we use is always addressing the most vulnerable, and the most vulnerable populations, in particular in the region, but everywhere around the world, are women and girls. So the next slide, please, Alex. I don't want to spend too much time on this piece, given that the speakers that came before me did a very good job of expanding on some of the complexities of the region, be it from increasing insecurity, violence, fragile democratic institutions, the impact, of course, of climate change. We've heard about the recent hurricanes, growing insecurity born out of irregular migration and what that means for trafficking in people, drugs, arms, the impact of COVID, that's actually exacerbated some of the challenges facing the governments of the region. What we didn't talk about as much perhaps is, yes, there's a lot of potential. There is a young and dynamic and entrepreneurial labor force, which we hope Canadian companies will be able to tap into. But we're also mindful of some of the competition and the big players, including the US, China, and Russia, that we need to be mindful of. I did want to just pick up on where Professor Samy introduced me, and that's on for the Government of Canada. The impact of COVID, as I said, kind of highlighted the existing fragilities in the region, but also highlighted the need for governments to mobilize online government services, and in particular with respect to health and education. And I think that's an important piece to keep in mind, because that's a niche area where Canada can certainly play a role, and where Canadian companies do have some expertise. So on the next slide, I just wanted to start with one of the main objectives that the Government of Canada has in the region in support of Canadian industry. There are three. There are many. Stick to the one is position Canadian industry and service providers as a partner of choice. The second is to support governments of their region in their desire to strengthen a predictable and transparent business environment. And the third is working with governments of the region in advancing a rules-based international order. You'll note that those top three priorities are also, of course, the priorities of the Minister, and therefore of the Government of Canada, and therefore of Global Affairs Canada. How do we do this, or how do we propose to do this, especially with this first objective in making Canadian industry a partner of choice? Well, one is that we want to build on the strong partnership that we already have in terms of government to government. We also want to build on the strong people-to-people ties. And we also want to build on the free trade agreements that we already have with countries of the region, Costa Rica, Honduras, and Panama. We know that other countries of the region, El Salvador, Guatemala, are also interested in signing free trade agreement with Canada. And we're engaged with those governments in preparing, how do you say, préparer le terrain, so to prepare the way to enter into those kinds of discussions. At the moment, it's very much about sharing Canada's vision with respect to an inclusive trade agenda, and what that means for those governments. Just want to be clear that we're not in the world of starting negotiations with other countries in Central America, but certainly we're working with them in terms of capacity building and know-how and sharing Canadian experience. We also want to work in terms of positioning Canadian industry with a plurality of partners. So it's no, I'm still on this slide, I think. It's no accident that we're engaging with Canadian industry, Canadian private sector, with development banks such as CABE where we can, building on the trade agreements, but also working with our trade portfolio partners in the family of the Government of Canada. And that includes the Canadian Commercial Corporation, EDC, Business Development Bank, and increasingly FinDev, which is a newly created development bank supporting projects in the region. What I want to say here in particular is CCC is very active in Central America, in particular because of the brand and the product that they offer, which is government to government contracting. And they do work with the host governments to deliver projects on time and on budget and in an open and transparent way. We believe this is a huge bonus. Not many governments around the world have this type of crown corporation, but is also an excellent partner for countries of the region or any country who want to introduce more transparency, especially with respect to government procurement. And this is an important point because of all the infrastructure investments, of course, that countries of the region are looking to make. Hopefully, as we talked about in a post-pandemic world where we're looking to build back better, build back greener, build back for the future. So on the next slide, I just wanted to touch on the fact that we are also very focused on the business environment piece, and we do a lot of that through capacity building, working with our companies of the region to ensure that they are acting responsibly, so what we're calling RBC, responsible business conduct. We are aligning our development assistance programming to strengthening the capacity of local governments to enact the appropriate laws, to ensure that human rights are being respected, to ensure that the benefits of trade population. So in that respect, our DEV program is aligned to our business. And we're also, in the context of our free trade agreements with Panama, Costa Rica, and Honduras, have parallel agreements on climate change, on the environment and climate change, and on labor. And in those two parallel agreements, what we pledged to do is work with the governments to strengthen their capacity and collaborate on our shared priorities in that space, so labor and climate change. On the next slide, I just want to give you a sense of the importance of two-way trade with the region. Small and has room to grow. It's no secret to people on this call that know the importance of international trade to Canada's prosperity, and that a lot of that prosperity hinges with our trade with our partner to the south. 85% of Canada's trade is with the neighbor to the south. And for as long as I've been in the government of Canada, we've been working to diversify our trade away from trading partner, because as everyone knows, it's pretty risky to put all of your eggs in one basket. Having said that, there's only a small portion of this export pie that's available for the rest of the world. And within that, Central America is not a very big player. As one can imagine, there's Europe and then Asia, within Asia, China. And so there's not very much left over for the rest of the world. And that's something we can turn into a positive and an opportunity in saying that there's a lot of room for growth. And I think that collectively we have an obligation or a challenge to put these opportunities in front of Canadian industry and to get them to see where the opportunities are. There's a lot we can build off as well in terms of some of the programs that are successful. And I just want to point out here the temporary foreign worker program, where countries of the region do send foreign workers to Canada to work on our farms, as you may know. And a big source country is Guatemala, but certainly El Salvador's, and an increasing number of countries are sending foreign workers to Canada. That could be a to further exchanges, and maybe Canadian companies could look at investing, those that are receiving foreign workers, to investing, and some are doing. On the next slide, I just want to touch a little bit on how do we actually support Canadian industry? And we do this through, well, obviously under the mandate of Ministry, but it's a network of trade commissioners. And these trade commissioners are based in our embassies in the region, in Panama, Costa Rica, in El Salvador. We have locally engaged and Canadian, Guatemala, of course. And what they do is provide key services to Canadian companies that are looking to expand in the world. And there is a list of the key services that we provide. So preparing for international markets, that means providing pretty much a briefing like we're just getting now, is what's the context, what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, or the risks that you need to be aware of. We assess market potential for their product and service. What's the position? What's the likelihood that your product or service will be successful in this market? Most importantly, I think, is we find qualified contacts. I think that this region of the world, unlike many others, perhaps, is very important, and that's what we stress to Canadian companies, that they need to have a partner. These are complex environments. Sometimes there's a language barrier. Very important to have a local partner that can work with the Canadian company. And then a big part of our work is also resolving conflicts and resolving problems, like a container of fresh fruit that might be stuck at order because a stick is missing or whatever it is. I just wanted to say, and we could certainly send the link afterwards, and you're welcome to look online for our trade commissioners, and that they would be the first point of entry for any company that's looking to expand their operations. Alex, the next slide, I just want to go quickly, very, very quickly, just give a bit of a snapshot of each of the markets and where we see business opportunities. I won't, but I want to say that we're bullish, very bullish on the whole infrastructure and P3, so public-private partnership approach. And I know I've spoken to Dr. Mossi about this. Canada is a worldwide expert in this space. We have a long history of P3s in Canada. And we want to export that expertise and knowledge around the world. And we want to do so through the CCC because they're also adept at managing projects. And those are full service projects with financing. So infrastructure P3 for El Salvador, but certainly true of the rest of the region as well. Costa Rica on the next slide. Just want to point out that they're one of our most important bilateral trading partners in the region. You'll see when I come to Guatemala that Guatemala is our most important in terms of volume of trade, but Costa Rica second. I think what's interesting about Costa Rica, of course, is that they've just joined the OECD, and Canada was a partner and collaborator in helping them meet the requirements to join the OECD. That's a huge how do you say, logro, a huge success for Costa Rica, and that confers a lot of business stability. And as you know, as I've said, Canadian companies don't have much space in terms of international markets outside of the US. So they're looking for stable business environments if they're looking to expand, and joining the OECD is a very strong mark of that stability. Honduras, you can see here that again, agriculture is kind of a sector that's common all across, and certainly is the case in Honduras, which is the next slide, Alex. What's important to note here is that Gildan, which is a Canadian textile company, is one of the largest private sector employers in Honduras. In fact, I discovered that they're also elsewhere in the region, including in the Dominican Republic, including a small presence in Haiti. And it's absolutely fascinating that they're able to have such an important, successful business venture in Honduras, and something perhaps we need to build on. Next, in Nicaragua, much more difficult business environment, and I think in the fact that there are much less Canadian companies present in that market. We heard one of our speakers talking about the recent elections, and so I just wanted to say that Canada's position has been there. I don't want to go into that, but what I want to say, Canadian companies also look at the political risk, not only the business environment, but what is the political risk of and the government's position and ideologies when they're looking to engage internationally. And I think this is borne out in the level of activity that we see in Nicaragua. The next slide, Guatemala. So I've already talked about the fact that they're our largest trading partner in Central America. The largest source of foreign workers from Central America is from Guatemala. In fact, they're the second largest in Canada after Mexico. So that's a big driver of economic prosperity in Guatemala, of course, because the foreign workers send home remittances and have guaranteed employment, but also an important contributor to food security in Canada. And here you can see some of the sectors where we see Canadian companies are active and looking to expand. And lastly, last slide is Panama. Very much the same type of sectors: agri-food, agriculture, clean tech, and mining. And the only reason I want to mention mining is because it's one of the, if not the biggest, it's the biggest investment in Panama outside Panama Canal. It's a $6 billion investment in a copper mine that is being led by a Canadian company, likely the biggest investment in Central America. So I don't know where I am with my timing, but I will end there and happily entertain questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Cesaratto. You've also provided us with a good overview of Canada's engagement with the region, but I think importantly also some of the potential opportunities that exist for businesses across very different countries sometimes, right? So thank you very much for that. So I will now open the floor for questions from the attendees. If people want to post a question in the Q&A, please go ahead. But in the meantime, as people are doing that, maybe I can use my advantage of being the moderator to perhaps ask a question of all the panelists, especially who are connected or based in America. So one of the challenges, of course, in a sort of post-COVID, or if we don't like post-COVID, but let's say in terms of how do we adapt to a new normal, is how you open up your economies. I think we all recognize that tourism is a big part of that for some of these countries. So can you tell us a little bit of the steps that your countries are taking in order to make sure that tourism can now flow back? And the reason I ask this question is because I also happen to come from a country that has a huge dependence on tourism, which is the small island of Mauritius. And the experience so far, when borders were reopened in October, is that it hasn't gone very well. And part of that is because it's very difficult to contain the virus when you have large flows of people. And so my question, I guess, is, how do you manage this transition as you slowly reopen borders? So what are some of the economic policies or social policies or general policies that your countries are implementing for people to be able to travel safely? Does anyone want to answer that question?
You want me to start with Dominican Republic, since I'm here?
Okay.
Thank you. No, I think the Dominican Republic is a leader in terms of getting tourism back. So, for example, it was on the one of the few countries that moved very swiftly. Ambassador, sorry to talk about your country. Maybe I should have let you, but
authority. Thank you for my country.
Thank you. No, and I use it as a good example because it moved very fast to get vaccines as soon as possible, and even provided vaccines to people and insurance for people who might come and visit the Dominican Republic and get sick. So I think it's, this is the type of proactive action in country can take to ensure that if a tourist comes to this country, it will come and it will have an enjoyable experience and will come back. And if by any chance it will get sick, it will get care. And if not, get vaccines as well. So I'm very pleased that some of the countries are actually following up the example of DDR in ensuring that tourism gets back and the economies get back to normal. So I think it's very clear when I see European countries that have issues and challenges getting people vaccinated, that's not the case in this region. People do want to get vaccinated, and the ones that have not is because I would say there is a small minority, but it is basically lack of availability in some of the other countries. So just let me stop there. Thank you.
Does anyone else want to add to these comments? Okay, I have Mr. Lima and then Mrs. Cesaratto. Why don't we start with Mr. Lima-Mena first?
Sorry, Teddy. I think that Sylvia was before me. So go ahead, Sylvia, if you want.
Okay, sorry.
Well, thank you. It's very gallant of you. I would have gone second happily, but I just wanted to add to Dr. Mossi's comments. It's certainly that we've noticed that vaccine rollout has been a lot slower in the region. Generally speaking, in Central America and the Caribbean, in fact, South America countries have been hard hit by COVID. When you look at the percentage of the population to the world population and the percentage of infection rates and death rates, much higher impact in this region, and then coupled with that slower vaccine rollout. So we just wanted to say in terms of the government, so that's one impact I think on the economy. But the second is to your question on tourism. Government of Canada rules also didn't help in terms of stimulating return of travelers, right, to leave Canadian shores. I think now that we have a certain level of confidence in Canada with over 85% double vaccines, we're starting to ease those restrictions, of course, and hopefully that will mean more Canadians traveling. Lord knows there's a lot of pent-up demand, having spent winters in Canada without being able to go to sunny shores, but they will be looking closely at what's happening in those countries in terms of vaccine protocols, vaccination rates, how seriously do the governments and citizens, regard the pandemic. But perhaps I'll just stop it there.
Thank you for answering that question, because that was going to be my follow-up question from the Canadian side about what is going on with tourism and what's being done. So I'm glad to hear your answer. So over to you, Mr. Lima-Mena.
So thank you very much, Teddy. Thank you, and good afternoon, Dante. Nice to see you. Hope you're having a good time in Dominican Republic. So nice to see you, Dante. In regards as to what we are doing in the Economic Secretariat, SIECA, we are about to agree, or ministers are about to agree into what is known as the biosecurity guidelines for the tourism sector. So basically what these guidelines will do is establish minimum parameters of, I would say, to take into consideration the flow of tourism within the region, so that the requirements are basically standardized within the region. So the basic idea is that the 8 countries have agreed on the, I would say, basic guidelines for this flow of people for tourism reasons, or I would say business tourism, to have like the rules of the game established. And itself, I think it's kind of a very important step in the right direction. As we know, nowadays, when one travels from one country to another, the question is, what are the requirements? What type of test should we have? So this type of uncertainties do affect tourism, as we might understand. So I think that this itself is kind of a major milestone as a region, having agreed to these guidelines. So this would be, I think this would be agreed upon by the different intersectoral committees, meaning by this the ministers of health, the ministers of economic integration, will agree on this on the next meeting of ministers in December, on December 17th. So this itself, I think it's kind of a major milestone. And then Central America as a whole has kind of very clear rules in terms of this. At the same time, we're working on the regional value chains within the region. And one of these chains is the tourism sector chain, which includes both sun, beaches, and the colonial aspects of Central America. And of course, the methodology being followed by this chain has been approved. And basically what this would do is interconnect the different service providers, basically MISMEs or SMEs, being involved in the operation. So from one standpoint, we have both tourism inflow, but at the same time, the benefit of the tourism or the sectors working or providing services within the tourism, I would say, value chain. So we're looking at the two aspects of, I would say, the tourism sector. So that's basically what currently we're doing in the Economic Secretariat.
There's a few questions directed at Ms. Cesaratto, so I feel almost compelled to ask questions because I think people are interested from a business perspective about what the opportunities are. So there's a question in particular about what specific business opportunities would interest Canada with companies in El Salvador. There's a question also about education, which you mentioned a few times and others have mentioned as well. So if you can actually expand on what you mean by the education sector in particular and examples of how Canadian companies could be involved. And I think one final question, I know it's a lot in a few minutes, is about whether there are specific programs or incentives, for instance, for Canadian companies to engage with the region.
Thank you for that. I was curious to see the 4 questions and then saw they were almost all addressed to me. But I will open the floor and ask colleagues to join me in the response, and in particular, Ambassador Cisneros, who I know has a lot of ideas on niche sectors where the Canadian industry should be following up opportunities. So what I would address in particular is the question is the angle on the FTA. So I would say that yes, Canada does like to negotiate free trade agreements because it levels the playing field for Canadian companies in a certain market, especially when that free trade agreements with other countries, right? So the idea of a free trade agreement is, free trade agreements are complex and they're not only looking at lowering tariffs on priority products. Certainly that's one aspect, but the new and improved free trade agreements that Canada is now negotiating, for instance, the last with the EU, also has a trade chapter, also has a modern trade dispute mechanism system. I mentioned earlier, labor and environment, they're very, very complex instruments. Having said that, we don't need free trade agreements to do business in a certain country. So yes, ideally, we hope that countries who want to enter into negotiations with Canada have the same level of ambition as we do. And that's our starting point. And the Government of Canada's starting point is it has to be a win-win for both countries. We're not going to give concessions and open up our market without having the same concessions in return. So I will just leave it there because that's a bit of where we're stumbling with some countries that want to enter into negotiations with Canada. A is on the level of action and B is on a reciprocal approach. But 3, we don't need free trade agreements to trade. And that's certainly the case for all of the countries where we do have trade volumes and no FTAs. I will pass the baton to the ambassador to talk more specifically on some of the sectors that he sees should be of interest to the industry. But before I do, on education, I will say that there are many communities in the education sphere in every country. There are opportunities, as I said, to offer Canadian know-how in terms of online learning, digitalization of education services. We have scholarships that are available to encourage an exchange of students. Now, you will know that Canadians are not very good at taking up opportunities to study but we are very good at attracting foreign students to come to Canada. And from the region, a big program scholarship is called the Emerging Leaders of the Americas program. We have institution-to-institution agreements where community colleges or even universities will partner with education facilities of the region to deliver joint courses, to do a semester abroad. McGill does that, for instance, with Panama. That's one example that I'm aware of. George Brown does that with George Brown College, culinary schools, with hotels associations of the region. Lots and lots and lots of opportunities, both from an individual perspective to allow them to come to Canada and vice versa, but also institution to institution, and thirdly, government to government as well in this space. So perhaps I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador Cisneros. It looks like you don't have a choice. You'll have to say something.
Yes, thank you very much, Sylvia, and thank you very much, Sylvia. True that at least concerning El Salvador, we are very much focused into niche markets. We are one of the smallest countries in Central America. Therefore, we are more focused on niche markets. I always say coffee, for example, is one of the most drinks consumed by Canadians, and we don't see much Salvadorian coffee consumed here in Canada. So that's one of the opportunities that we have seen. But also there's also cacao. We have some honey that could be interesting. But also all the new foods that is not very well known by Canadians. We are trying to promote different ingredients that are coming from tropical, from our region, and that they are not consumed here. So there's a variety of agro products that could be imported to Canada, and that could be very much of a taste for Canadian consumers. But we still need to educate all these populations on how to consume these products. And I think one of the advantages that we have is the presence of a large community. In Canada, we are around 120,000 Salvadorians, which is the largest Central American community in Canada. And that's also, in the future, I see that that's going to be side of economic relations with Canada, simply because descendants or second generations of Salvadorian will definitely be more linked with Canada. Just a bracket on education. I think there's also a lot of opportunities. For example, online teaching, something that we are very much looking into. That could be of very much help for educating rural areas that are not reachable in traditional ways. Canada, for that, has a great example because they needed, because of the largest geography of the country, have been able to reach remote areas and provide state services, education to remote areas. That same technology could be used for us, Central America, to be able to educate and to increase the level of education to rural areas. And that is something that I always try to focus on. Now, I agree with what you say, that TLC doesn't necessarily increase the level of investment of trade, but that provides some guarantee for investors to be able to be sure that they are finding a framework or legal framework and transparent guarantees to be able to invest, and providing to all Central American countries the same level of guarantee will definitely promote integration. And that's exactly what I think Francisco Lima was explaining. We need to have a framework, common framework, to provide to Canadian investors the possibility to invest in a very safe environment in the whole region. At the end of the day, what is important for El Salvador is also to be integrated in Central American economy and to integrate Central American economy to a larger economy in the world. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador. I don't know if any of our panelists want to react to what's been said so far. I want to give everyone the opportunity to respond or react to some of the comments. Dr. Daudelin, Dr. Mossi, you've already...
Teddy, while some of the panelists think about how they might pipe in. I just wanted to address also the question related to education and Canadian companies.
Yeah.
Because I think that was one of them. And I think I did mention that we do want to work with Canadian companies that are already established in the region, and we do. I mentioned Gildan, Scotiabank has a very strong footprint in the region, as does, I'm going to forget their name now, the telephone company, I'm forgetting now. What we do with them is work through their CSR programs, so corporate social responsibility programs, where they have dedicated programs to work with in the communities where they are based. Them through those programs offer building, skills upgrading to the community, even if they're not working in their company. So I think that's an important, and we help support that. That's an important kind of partnership, but also many companies send some of their up and coming and brightest and highest potential employees to further their education, either elsewhere in the region or back to Canada. So I think that's kind of an example of where Canadian industry is also playing in this space. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think I'm going to turn it over now, because in the interest of time, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time. So there were a couple of other questions, but we'll keep them, and I'm sure we'll find a way maybe to respond, or maybe it's something that the panelists might want to take a look at for their own sort of interests, and maybe reflect on those later. I know we all, many of you work in this area, so I'm sure the questions will be helpful anyway, even if we don't have a lot of time to answer all of them. So with that said, let me now ask the Ambassador of Honduras in Canada and Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, Her Excellency Sofía Cerrato Rodríguez, to offer some closing remarks. Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Teddy, and thanks to everyone for participating today. This was a very marvelous exposition from all the participants today. For me, COVID-19 pandemic was not only a global health crisis, but it was also an opportunity so that we can all rethink what we wanted, the way we want to live moving forward. Our countries, our governments have an opportunity to move away from the status quo and make positive changes that can people. I think that we can all agree that one of the lessons learned from this pandemic is the importance of global cooperation. And the international community, as well as international financial institutions, multilateral and regional development banks like NPSIA, must play a critical role in providing necessary financing to the region's economies. I do believe our region has an excellent potential and an opportunity to position itself as a region of choice for nearshoring and foreign investment that can ramp up job creation and help us with all these migration problems that we are facing. We can offer company supply chains at competitive cost. And this is where Canada can be a key ally by deepening and expanding foreign investment partnerships in the SICA region. Sylvia, I put in on the table again, Mr. Mossi's proposal. We've been discussing this with you, and Mr. Mossi was put it on the table again today. So keep in mind that I think there's so much we can do together. And definitely we must continue this dialogue, set the footprint for a joint economic recovery and sustainable development through, as Sylvia mentioned, green partnership. So thank you all.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. So let me also thank all the panelists for their comments, the attendees and the organizers of this meeting, in particular the staff of the Office of the Vice President, Research and International, Rebecca Windover, Alex Pilkington, and Nathaniel Whelan, who will have providing support as well. Maybe one suggestion I would have in terms of final remarks is to say this should be the first of more events, I believe. I've already seen a few questions being asked about climate change, for example, or clean tech. And I think these are very important issues, both for Canada and of course, the region and the world. And so I hope we'll be able to organize other events where we bring together and discuss some of the important issues. There are no shortage of things to discuss, but I would try and do this again and meet again to discuss some of these very important issues. One of the great things, of course, with COVID-19 is that we've learned to get together from many different parts of the world. So I think it's something that we should definitely take advantage of. So with that, I will wish you all a pleasant evening. You all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Mr. Mossi.
Bye. Bye from
Gracias.
Much to all of you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Good evening.